All right, Monero Matteo, welcome back. So we've got a good bit of news to go through today. I mean, I leave for a week or two from media, and I come back and I just go through the streams of news on Twitter, and it's crazy just how much vindication that we're having. And I'm not saying that to be prideful, but seriously, at this point, as we said in the last video, it's not that we're early, it's just everybody else is late to the party and figuring this stuff out in regards to Monero being valuable, in regards to the lack of privacy on Bitcoin, the implications of that, the fungibility issues, and blah, 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 everything that we've talked about for quite a long time here. And there's a quote that I want to get to from one of our buddies who said something to the effect of, oh, well, it's just kind of disappointing that we see so many Bitcoin bros continuing to advocate for transparent ledger technology when it's becoming obvious that data analytical firms are being integrated in everything that's going to be part of the new crypto world order, everything that's going to be integrated with exchanges, which are going to become the new banks of the 21st century, and financial crackdowns that we're seeing with PayPal and in different countries like Turkey, where people are being arrested because the government isn't liking what they're doing with their financial transactions, which is something you can do rather easily with Bitcoin. So we're going to get into all that today, but I have some news for you guys. I may have to take a little bit of a break here to focus on some positive developments that are going on in my life. So I'm going to be moving to a different part of Georgia, and still going to be nearby the church, thank God. But I'm in the middle of a move, and I'm going to be starting a couple businesses too. Fortunately, I'm going to be living in a house with a buddy of mine, which is going to be by a main road. And so I thought to myself, this would be a great opportunity to set up a business. And so I'm thinking about setting up an accounting firm. I'm thinking about setting up a guitar lessons practice. You see this guitar over here. I played guitar for about 15 years, so I'm thinking about doing some lessons. And in regards to accounting, in regards to guitar, and the buddy who I'm moving in with, who is a carpenter, we're going to be accepting Monero. So if you live in the Southeast US, or you just want some remote online accounting services, or you want to learn how to fiddle the guitar, I'll accept Monero, and we could make something happen. But just trying to grow the circular economy, trying to live by the words I speak to some degree. And yeah, I think that's what's most important, as many of you guys have commented here. What's really important is growing the parallel economy, because I don't think a lot of people out there are going to get this in time. Like the philosophical elements of money, the importance of Monero, its fungibility, and everything like that until it's too late. Frankly, I think that's just what's going to happen. And so what's important is that we set up supply chain networks in our local area. Me and my buddy are going to find a farm or some producer of food nearby us and try to make an arrangement with them in Monero, as some of you guys have done, like Nick Watts, Fatal Glory. He found a farmer to trade in Monero. And also, I have a crane worker of mine, a good buddy of mine, Jesse, who accepts Monero as well for crane services down in the Southeast US. Go check him out. Get in touch with me. Yeah, we just need to grow the circular economy and make it so that most people that we know who can do the goods and services that we need to either get access to or have done, we need them to accept Monero, because that's how we can truly make this stuff valuable, even if the broader community doesn't see the value of it yet. And that's what's really important. Monero is taking over the dark web marketplaces. That's fine. The dark web's going to boom because of the increase in price controls, which is going to lead to shortages and rationing and a boom in the black market. So that's good to some degree, right? But ultimately, we do want to make this stuff accessible and acceptable and accessible to even normal people out there. We want to have a quote-unquote clear net market, if you want to call it that. I think that's important. I think that's important. That's probably the most productive thing we can do, other than just talking about it and being Monero reply guys, which have a value in of themselves. I love the Monero reply guys, no matter what anybody says. And yeah, the value will grow from there. And I want to respond to somebody who made an argument on my Odysee video, and he said that you need to have debt backing your currency in order for it to be stable or something like this. Somewhat of an interesting critique I haven't seen before. We'll get to that at the end of the video. Just saying, it's not necessarily the case. Gold has been used for thousands of years. There wasn't necessarily a second tier fractional reserve banking system, which tied this stuff down in debt and made it so that you have to pay back gold in order to set up the system where it has some kind of established demand. Because the argument is, well, you got to have a debt-based structure that incentivizes people to take this stuff for payment in order for it to be established as a currency, creating currency stability as far as the price goes. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, particularly with Monero, because Monero provides a unique service. Monero provides financial privacy on a digital level. And that's something that you don't really get with anything else. So even if it doesn't become the world reserve currency necessarily, it's still a service. And what you're doing when you buy Monero is you are, in a way, storing a value which is unique. You're storing the capacity to transact value that is off the system. Whether or not that value is stable or not is another consideration. But the main value comes from its capacity to provide financial privacy and a level of trust because of the fungibility that you can't really get with anything else, really. And so in a way, it's a store of value. I've never really called it a store of value, but in that sense, I would say it is a store of value. Think of it more as a service right now, which is monetary in essence, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the core fundamental currency or asset that's backing all the other currencies or assets in a monetary or global economic system. So that's something to consider. But we have a lot to get into here today in regards to news. It's almost like an inside joke at this point, because we're seeing the Bitcoin bros and the crypto bros just run in circles, and just the cognitive dissonance is becoming obvious. And, it's just quite something to see. We're just here laughing. We're just here having a good time. I also wanted to say, when I come back from my break, I'm going to be doing an interview with Doug. It's going to happen. We're going to do our Monero talk. It's been a year and a half in the making, and I've been on there a couple times to chat a little bit, but ultimately we got to have a sit-down Monero talk. I love Doug. He does so much for the community. He's always going out there to conferences and events and beaches even to tell people about Monero, which is really how it's done. So a lot of respect for Doug. I'm looking forward to that conversation. And hopefully when I get back and I get the home office set up and everything, I can talk to more people. Maybe I can have Luke Smith on because I've talked with him a couple times in person at different events, and I enjoy his company, and I think maybe you guys could get a lot out of our conversations. Interestingly enough, we typically don't talk about Monero when we get together. We talk about Orthodox Christianity and life and just other wonderful things. And, that's sort of the reason why I don't do a lot of the spaces online, and I don't talk to other Monero bros on the internet, because I'm very busy, and a part of me is just sort of like, well, we're just going to be talking about something that we're largely in agreement on. So what's the productive capacity of that? But that is somewhat of an antisocial take. I recognize that. So I will be out there to talk to Doug and hopefully get Arctic Mind back on, because I know you guys love those conversations. And we will hopefully get back at it once I get posted up in the new spot. So that's all I got to say in regards to that for the updates. Let's get into the content. And I do want to say thank you guys for the donations on the last video. The donations were quite fantastic on the last video relative to the other videos. I'm not sure if it's because I said something. One of you had commented that one of the donation addresses in the link of the video was different than the address that I post at the beginning of the video. They all go to the same place. Don't worry about it. I should receive it if you send it to either one of those addresses. So thank you guys for those donations. I really appreciate it. It's really quite wonderful. I had a fella reach out. His name is Carl. What's up, Carl? And that's a pseudonym. That's not a real name. But you wanted an update on Seraphis. That's something that you had requested because you're creating like this document to give to other people in your local community in Europe. And apparently there's like this pro-freedom movement happening in Europe. He's a part of that movement. And I guess our channel had inspired him to create a document that explains what Monero is, the use case of it, in order to give that to other bros in this freedom community so that they can think about using freedom money. And I think that is great. And he wanted an update on Seraphis. I can't really get into the technicals of it, but our buddy Ko, who I don't know if he's my buddy necessarily, but he's a great part of the community who works on a lot of technical stuff. he is working on the Seraphis code. And here's a 3-hour video update if you want to get into the tech behind it. But if you want to get a better idea holistically as to what Seraphis is, go check out my buddy Kevin Wad. We love Kevin Wad. Miss you, brother. He does a video on Seraphis, and he'll tell you sort of what it's about and what the implications of it are. But it's still a work in process. It's still coming along. It's going to increase the privacy. It's going to make a lot of things better without getting too into the nitty-gritty. So that's my update for you there. And at the end of the video, I'll get to more of what you have to say. But I just want to get into the content here because we've got a lot to go through. So I just wanted to give this a shout out. This is on the Monero Reddit. Apparently there's a new Monero forum that's out there on Reddit for those who are engaged in business and accept Monero, which I think is fantastic. We used to do Monero Marketing Mondays here on the channel, which was really something exciting and useful, I think, to a good number of people. And I'll be able to join you guys rather soon with my own services. I don't know of any accountants or guitar bros who accept Monero, so I'm glad I could add a little bit of diversity to the space. But this guy has a great idea on getting those guys together. I guess this is going to be a regular thread every Friday to talk about who accepts this stuff. So go check this out. Become part of the forum. Go to our Monero Market, which is the subreddit, and let's grow the parallel economy. Let's do it. So into the content, long opening, but you guys mostly come here for the news. You guys mostly come here for the confirmation that your instincts and your position is, for the most part, correct. And I think one of the reasons why I've been able to maintain a level head on this stuff without getting too crazy into, sort of religious crypto fanaticism or this belief that crypto is going to save the world or Bitcoin is unstoppable or anything like that is I typically don't spend too much time in the crypto space. I mean, it takes a short amount of time for me to actually pull up the information that I want to talk about in a video. I mean, I just go through the streams for, let's say, like 30 minutes, pick out the news articles, and talk about it. I don't consume too much crypto content out there. And so my takes are, for the most part, rather original. And, if you agree with the takes, that's good. If you don't, you give your arguments, and I adapt my take in that sense. But, I think it's healthy to kind of step back a little bit from the space if you're too in deep into it and just kind of reorient yourself, because the way social media works and the way that crowd psychology works, you can definitely develop a, I guess you could say, perverted sense of where things are going and how your position is playing into a lot of the stuff. And so I think it's good to always take a step back. But anyways, let's start with X-Kryptonite. He's a friend of the channel. He's got a lot of great takes. Go give him a follow. He says, I can't be the only Monero person who is profoundly disappointed that smart people who understand the problems with the current financial system and who have large audiences promote Bitcoin as some kind of solution and totally ignore Monero. And yeah, this plays into what we've talked about here in regards to big coin. I think there is an establishment which has cropped up in the crypto space who are Bitcoin maximalists for the most part and advertise Bitcoin as the solution to all. And they don't, pay any attention to alternative cryptocurrencies out there which may be able to do what Bitcoin does better. And obviously, we think that's the case for Monero, but there's been a little bit of an increase in balkanization, I guess you could say, in the Bitcoin sphere, where you have people like Pompliano and Clemente and Nick What's-His-Face sort of stepping back from the maximalism a little bit and noticing that there is value in other cryptocurrencies which may specialize in something that Bitcoin doesn't necessarily do the best. And I personally don't have any Bitcoin. I don't own any Bitcoin. Some Monero bros disagree. They think you should own Bitcoin because it's so obviously going to be the number one big thing. And that's fine. I understand that perspective. But for me, I just don't see any value in Bitcoin because it's not the best at doing much of anything. It may be the first to market, and so it has that name brand recognition. When people think of crypto, they think of Bitcoin. That's something that's definitely valuable. But for me, it's not the best in anything. And me being a fundamental value investor, why would I invest in something that I believe to be egregiously overvalued? Monero is better at Bitcoin in almost every sense. And it's private, it's fungible, the transaction costs are cheaper, you have more decentralization because of the ASIC's resistance, and on and on and on. Check out our video, 5 Reasons Crypto, or Monero is the king of crypto. We go into the reasons there why Monero is the king. It's not really Bitcoin, but it's a psychology, a crowd psychology that's played into Bitcoin, and there are a lot of influencers who get a lot of value talking about Bitcoin because it's the big thing. But personally, for me, I think there's going to be somewhat of a shift that happens. I'm still waiting for this to happen, but I think there's going to be a kind of social profit to be made by talking about Monero more instead of Bitcoin, because you're going to be at the front of that sea change. And there are going to be defections. There are going to be Bitcoin refugees who become dissatisfied with the rise of third-party custodianship, the rise of Bitcoin mining centralization, the rise of fungibility problems, and the lack of privacy, which has implications for just about everything. Okay, so I think there's a lot of value, and you could say there's a game theory thing that's going to kick in for big Bitcoin proponents to say, you know what, I think Monero is actually the way to go. I think Monero has solved a lot of problems that Bitcoin has, and so I think I'm going to dip my toe into Monero, maybe start talking about that a little bit more. I think that's going to happen, and at some point a trickle is going to turn into a flood. Now, there's going to be the incessant FUD out there about audit supply issues, about the tail emission. Oh, there's not a hard cap. We've talked about all that. It's actually a good thing for the long-term security model in regards to auditability. There's a lot to go into that. You can actually check out the Coinbase amounts, and then you can get into the arguments about, well, if you trust the supply, then you should trust the cryptography, and ultimately it's the cryptography that you have to trust at the end of the day, in which case the UTXO monitoring doesn't really matter that much. We can get into all that anyways. But it is a little bit disheartening. We're going to get to some people here in this video who are big Bitcoin proponents, and they don't talk about Monero pretty much ever. But they talk all the time about how people are getting caught up in their financial transactions being surveilled by the authorities and then getting arrested or suffering some kind of penal consequence. And this is something which is rather interesting because it showcases a cognitive dissonance. Most of these people know about Monero, and so you have to ask yourself, is there some kind of agenda here, some kind of alternative goal for the individual who's supporting Bitcoin and endorsing it in this environment that doesn't align with what they actually really purportedly believe for freedom and for financial sovereignty? So moving on, Kryptonite says, I guess it's a little bit like Monero being locked out of most centralized exchanges. People with large audiences are like centralized exchanges. Exactly. They're gatekeepers. They wouldn't have large audiences if they promoted solutions which are not supported by the status quo. Right. So I've gotten this quite a bit here on the channel. I've had people comment going back to really the start saying, you should have 100,000 subscribers. Wow, you make so much sense. You should be on some of the biggest crypto shows, whatever. And what, after like 140 videos, we have like, 1.7 subscribers, 1.7K subscribers. And that's fine. I mean, I'm not trying to change the world here necessarily. I'm just trying to get the right people on the right lifeboat here and start the system, the alternative system, the parallel economy. I don't need a big audience, and that would probably be bad for my for my pride, right? But ultimately, there is a gatekeeping phenomenon in crypto where it's like you got people like Barry Silbert who don't talk about Monero, but they'll talk all day about Zcash, which is a corporate-run crypto. I mean, they got PPP loans, and 97% of the transactions on Zcash aren't even private. They're not shielded transactions. And then you've got other people talking about Dash as if that's some kind of privacy coin, which it isn't. And it's just quite something. And Bitcoin, what's that guy's name? Who's the guy who got into it with same Bankman-Fried or whatever his name is? what's his name? Bitcoin Crypto or Big Boy Crypto or something like that. He made a video a couple years ago about why you shouldn't invest in privacy coins. But he's out there as some kind of industry leader trying to lead the crypto revolution to freedom and sovereignty and non-KYC. And it's like, again, why are you telling people not to get into privacy coins when that's obviously the place where you want to go if you don't want your transactions tracked and if you don't want to get into this whole KYC scheme, especially because in the Monero community, in the Monero sphere, you've got the rise of decentralized exchanges, you've got the rise of peer-to-peer mining pools, and it's just like Monero is obviously the solution in an adverse Orwellian environment, but you don't have a lot of people promoting it. And the people who promote Monero, which some people still call an altcoin, they don't get the same traction, unfortunately. But that's fine. That's fine. To some degree, it's kind of nice because the governments, they don't really see Monero yet as a threat, even though the IRS does have a $600,000 bounty on it. But we're going to get to here some Chinese bros, some intelligence agents, if you want to call them intelligent. They were trying to mix Bitcoin in like a wasabi coin join to try to make it so that their transactions weren't going to be tracked by the CCP, and they got caught. So if they don't even know about Monero yet, and the CCP isn't really paying much attention, cool, we can still use it to grow the parallel economy. We still have time to set up those structures and those networks. So maybe it's a blessing that it's not getting out there as prominently yet. But so moving on, he says, so these large voices on Twitter and other places sound just like the propaganda that we're all trying to escape from because they refuse to mention the utility of Monero and the failures of Bitcoin. I have very vivid memories of a guy that was referred to as Baghdad Ali. He was the minister of propaganda for Saddam Hussein during the early days of the Iraq War. This guy would get up in front of the international press and make all kinds of pronouncements about how Saddam Hussein's forces were winning the war, even as U.S. troops were closing in on Baghdad. It was completely absurd. I will certainly grant that Bitcoin may have legs that are far from perfect, but may support the status quo banking system during a difficult time ahead, but not for very long. The real revolution is a fungible, peer-to-peer currency. This is what Bitcoin was supposed to be, and it's harmful to suggest to the public that Bitcoin has the potential to reform the current system rather than be co-opted by it. Right. And, we've seen consistently this cope where it's like, oh, if the government adopts it, we'll be able to see what the government's doing with their money. We've talked about the problems with that. They're going to be able to see what you're doing with your money. If you get the central banks to stop printing money, great, but they're going to make up that tax shortfall by taxing the crap out of you, which they're easily going to be able to do because Bitcoin's going to be totally transparent, third-party laden with custodianship, and you're going to have a hard time trying to really be off the system, quote-unquote, with your Bitcoin. So he continues. He says, you're not helping the public by feeding them this line of BS. Quite the opposite. You're doing the status quo banking system a favor. Yeah, I mean, if you guys remember Ray Dalio like 2 years ago said something to the effect of, well, if Bitcoin was actually a threat, the powers that be would have done something about it. They would have done something about it by now. So the fact that they haven't done anything about it, and the fact that MasterCard is integrating Bitcoin into stuff, and we're going to get to something here in a little bit where it could be that Twitter integrates people's Bitcoin addresses into their profiles, which is just going to be, lovely, right? Because forget about privacy at that point. But it is quite interesting. So moving on, I think that's a good take. Let me get a little drink here. So one of these people who calls himself a human rights activist, Alex Gladstein, interesting, says the Turkish regime has arrested 543 people after spying on their financial transactions and deciding that some payments were inappropriate. Okay, so this is a Bitcoin bro. Never talks about Monero. He writes for the Bitcoin magazine. Big Bitcoin bro. Okay, so this chief strategic officer of the Human Rights Foundation, who's a Bitcoin bro, is telling you that people are being arrested in Turkey for the financial transactions being spied upon. Do you guys see the dissonance here? Do you guys see the issue with this? But again, does anyone except Monero Bros call him on this? because Ion Nicolasu, good Monero bro, he says, Bitcoin fixed this right. It does fix it right. The number will still go up, yes. And yeah, even more irresponsible, this guy, because of this, advocates for Bitcoin as a solution. And it's just like, oh my gosh. It's almost like these people should be sued for crypto malpractice. I mean, it's amazing that this is like acceptable in the crypto sphere, and there's very little pushback on it. I mean, I just think it's totally irresponsible. But moving on, Alex Gladstein, he has another post. He says, PayPal has frozen payments to a Hong Kong pro-democracy group, citing unspecified excessive risks. Bitcoin fixes this nonsense. Okay, do you guys remember the trucker Canadian convoy? Did Bitcoin fix that? Do you guys remember people were being dragged into court after the Canadian trucker convoy protest fiasco because they had sent Bitcoin to an address that had been blacklisted by the authorities in Canada? So this is not something Bitcoin necessarily fixes. This could actually get a lot of people in trouble who are totally unaware of how trackable and traceable this stuff is. But is he going to mention Monero? Is he going to mention this downside? Is he going to say, hey, Bitcoin fixed this, but you have to read the 60,000-page Bitcoin privacy guide? No, he's not going to say that. He's just going to say, Bitcoin fixed this, buy Bitcoin, my number's going to go up. Isn't that awesome? Right? It's just so crazy. It's just so crazy, man. But they'll just continue to get away with it. But check this out. As we mentioned before, this is from CoinDesk. The 2 Chinese intelligence officers charged with obstructing justice for allegedly bribing a U.S. double agent with $61,000 in Bitcoin used coin mixing wallet Wasabi to try to cover their tracks. And it didn't work. Just like it didn't work for the Bitfinex bros. Just like it didn't work for many other people. Bitcoin Fog, etc. There are many such examples of this. And yet, you're going to have the Gladstein bros continue to say, yes, right this way. Just use a Coin Mixer, which is probably going to be banned here in the future, just like Tornado Cash was. And there's another mixer, I think, which was banned at some point. But even exchanges now are seeing coin mixing as high-risk activity. And so if you deposit your mixed coins onto an exchange, I mean, you could have your account shut down, or maybe if you're in the Netherlands, as we've seen examples of, your Bitcoin conscripted. So it's just like, yeah. It's like we wish we could have like some kind of Twitter megaphone to just blast out to the crypto bros. Newsflash, Bitcoin is going to get you arrested in the future if you use it just like these bros tried to, right? I mean, it's very hard to be private with Bitcoin. People don't understand this. And it's going to get harder as we move into the future. Again, because the less people are private on chain, because the more people who are using third-party custodianship, the more people who are not using this stuff privately by using a different address for each transaction, blah, 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 blah. That's going to create more data that the data intelligence firms can use in order to figure out who is using Bitcoin privately, because they can look at the metadata, they can connect dots and such, right? Anyways, Odell, he says, should not be a surprise to anyone who has been watching, but it seems like it needs to be said. In practice, there are effectively 2 Lightning networks. One is an interoperable protocol between regulated custodians, which is going to be the main network, believe it, and the other is a sovereign network mostly supported by individuals. Okay, I think that the regulated custodians who have more money are going to be able to offer cheaper fees for using their nodes, and I think that more people are just going to opt to use that, right? I'm not doing anything wrong, so why not just go through the channels? And again, people are going to be advertised to saying Lightning is private, just use Lightning and everything's going to be fine. I mean, you probably have people out there who think that they're using Lightning privately even though they gave like Strike, for example, their social security number and their bank account information. I mean, they could actually believe that they're using it privately because of the propaganda that's out there. And so I think it's going to be increasingly regulated. We've talked about here on the channel how privacy is pretty much non-existent, as said by the people who work on the Lightning Network. I mean, there are methods you could do to use it privately. I think Seth for Privacy has said, but that's inaccessible, I think, to like 95% of the people out there who don't have the time to look into all that stuff and don't have the tech know-how to do it. So I think it's just much more responsible to advocate for Monero and just say, hey, use Monero. It's a lot simpler. It's plug-and-play private. Boom. But Odell, he says, the former seems to have found solid project market fit, expects significant volume adoption and usage going forward. And he says the former. He says the interoperable protocol between regulated custodians. Okay, significant volume adoption and usage. Right. So again, custodianship, KYC, going to be part of the Bitcoin protocol or just payment system. The latter future remains to be seen. Okay, so he's expressing doubts. He says dependence on Tor, which has had massive reliability issues and lack of strong privacy guarantees, put it at risk. Okay, so we're starting to see, again, a little bit of a ceding of ground in regards to the reality of what's going to be happening with Layer 2 solutions in regards to Bitcoin's privacy as a whole as a payment channel. Okay, and that means the fungibility problem is not going to be fixed on Layer 2 either, which essentially means it's not going to be money on any layer. Not that it was, because it has to be fungible on the base layer, which means it has to be private on the base layer. And that means it's going to fail as money. It's going to fail. Or it's just going to be turned into a total surveillance grid like you can't imagine. Right? So that's something to note. We're just out here trying to tell people the easy solution, which is Monero, or just use gold and silver. Hell, I mean, I'd rather just get gold than hold Bitcoin. Seriously, I'd rather have gold just sitting underground than Bitcoin in a non-KYC wallet, because if you continue to have the expansion of KYC, and if you continue to have a diminishment of privacy as a whole in the aggregate, then it's going to be harder to get out of that position. And I remember Jeff Berwick talking to some bro, it must have been like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and the guy was sitting, I think, on like $150 million Bitcoin. He had bought it really early on, and his problem was he didn't know how to cash it out. He didn't know how to cash it out without the authorities knowing. Now, I always recommend pay your tax and whatever, but that's a problem, and it's going to be increasingly a problem. And there was something that somebody had said, which I thought was interesting recently. I mean, maybe you didn't make $150 million, but you kept your Bitcoin there for a long time. You didn't move it to any layer 2s where transaction costs are cheaper. But if more adoption happens for Bitcoin and it continues to stay at 7 transactions or so per second, they don't increase the block size, and you're stuck on the layer 1, okay, well, who's going to be paying for the fees, especially if the halving continues, in order to keep the security alive? Well, it's going to be the big banks, and they're going to be able to pay really high fees to fit their transactions into the block so that they could settle their transactions for the layer 2s or whatever that they're doing. Okay, and then are the little bros going to be able to compete with that? How much are the little bros who forgot to take their Bitcoin and move it to the layer 2, or just to sell and cash out and go into Monero, how much are they going to have to pay in order to get out of there? Okay, that's something to consider. So moving on, Odell says when a suit says the words regulatory clarity, they really mean the ability to track and censor every financial transaction you make. Let me just make sure I'm recording. Okay, good. They are building a prison, calling it innovation, and then asking you to thank them. No thanks. Okay, yeah. Monero Bros has been saying this forever. I totally agree. Totally agree. It's the big tech takeover. It's the legacy financial system takeover. It's the new crypto world order. Absolutely. It's the crypto coup d'etat. Ryan Sean Adams. Okay, and we're staying on this thread here of regulatory capture. He says, Sam, with respect, this absolutely sucks. And he's referencing Sam saying they need to be more regulatory compliant. It's going to be good for the adoption, blah, blah, blah. Talking about how OFAC is going to sanction addresses and the efficacy. But he says that you're saying DeFi should be OFAC'd. And he's responding to Sam. And then he says you're saying on-chain freezes should be normal. You're saying DeFi front ends to register as broker-dealer, which essentially means they're not DeFi. Really? No, this is not reasonable. This would eliminate the U.S. from the crypto race. And one thing I want to note up here is that there's this belief, right, that KYC, not a big issue. If we got to do KYC to expand adoption, let's do it. Who cares? Because the financial system is going to collapse anyway. The empire is going to fall, in which case they're not going to be able to do KYC because we're just going to live in like this libertarian, decentralized cypherpunk utopia, in which case there's going to be no regulation to stop this stuff and we can just do whatever we want. Okay. That's a big bet. That's a huge bet. It's like, okay, well, we may be moving in a totally Orwellian, financially surveillant, panopticonical direction, but you know what? It's all going to blow up. It's all just going to blow up, you see, when we all adopt Bitcoin and we're all like in this total surveillance system. The Eye of Sauron's just like fractally on everybody. Oh, well, you see, it's just going to blow up. It's just going to blow up. It's just not going to exist anymore. The U.S. empire is going to fall. And then what's going to happen? Well, who's waiting in the wings? Okay, let's look at the geopolitics. Who is going to take over? India, Russia, China, the East as a whole? Have they been friendly to crypto? Have they been like, oh, yeah, we're embracing crypto, integrating it into our payment systems and whatever? No. They've been banning it. They've just been banning the crap out of it. They've been making you take tests, as is the case in Russia, if you want to buy a certain amount of Bitcoin. Everything is KYC. Everything is custodian if it's legal. And by the way, they're rolling out their CBDCs, which means that if a non-CBDC crypto is being adopted at a rate that is threatening to the success of the CBDC, they're going to ban it because you obviously know whose side the government is on in regards to that. And we're going to get to that here a little bit here as well. But yeah, India also is thinking about banning it completely. Huge taxes. Portugal's thinking about transfer taxes, and that was like a crypto-free country, right, where there was going to be no taxes. We told you that wasn't going to happen. Now they're coming out with taxes, or at least being considered right now. I haven't looked at an update. Transfer tax basically means if you transfer the digital asset from one person to another, you pay a tax on the value that you transfer to a certain degree. It's like real estate. If you sell a house, you got to pay a transfer tax, which is usually about 1%. At least it is here in Georgia, which means that you pay tax on the transfer, which means you basically can't use it as a currency. It's property. And how are you going to use something as a currency if you got to pay a tax on every single transaction? It doesn't make sense, okay? But your options aren't much better if the U.S. falls. If anything, the West has been much more lenient on crypto than the East. And so I just don't understand where these people get this perspective where it's like, oh, well, it's all going to blow up. We're going to be in a libertarian society. Libertarianism is going nowhere. Less people are libertarian now than they were 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, most of the libertarians that I saw back in the day, many of them have stopped becoming libertarians. Now they're hardcore conservatives, they're MAGA Republicans, or they're just Christian nationalists. I used to be a Republican. I used to be a libertarian. I used to be doing the free speech balls on campus. I used to be talking about the national debt. That used to be my thing. But now I don't care about libertarianism. It's like completely off my mind because it's a non-option, basically. And I also think that if you really want to have society start going the right direction, it's a spiritual matter. You got to get people in the church. You got to heal their hearts and you got to heal their souls. You got to get them into orthodoxy, and then you can worry about politics later. And I have a whole thing on that. I'm not going to get into it now, but yeah, this whole trend towards authoritarianism is not going away. Peter Thiel, he did a video about a week ago. I think we talked about it, or maybe it was a month ago. We did talk about it in the last video where he sees the future as having 3 potential outcomes. Either, and he's talking about the West in particular, he's talking about the future being run by eco-fascists who want to track your transactions, do carbon taxes, make sure you're not going over your allotted carbon rationing limits, right? And we've seen this with MasterCard with their carbon credit card and such. We did a video on that. Check it out. And then he sees the Chinese AI social credit system takeover as being another option. Or you have Sharia law because the Muslims are outbreeding pretty much everybody else, in which case you're going to have to pay the Jesus tax if you're not a Muslim. And good luck having your libertarian society at that point. Not going to happen. So I don't see this cope that the Bitcoin bros have where it's like, oh, the empire is going to fall. We're not going to have to worry about it. Everything's going to be centralized. Or, the government's going to adopt this stuff. We're going to see what they're doing with their money. You guys understand these are insane levels of copes, right? They're insane. And it's so obvious that Monero is just the best crypto out there for what it is we're moving into. And could it be that they ban Monero? Sure, but there are backups to that. And it could be that Monero is inaccessible to a lot of the population. Okay, I get that, especially if they really do a crackdown. But if you know better, if you know a few things, Monero is pretty much unstoppable, okay? And we talked with Arctic Mind about that in regards to maybe they take Apple and Microsoft And they say you can't support any Monero wallets, but people can still run nodes. People can still mine Monero with the ASIC resistance of a laptop. It's totally decentralized. It's the best system for the job with the future that we're moving into. And I think it's only going to get more Orwellian and totalitarian from here if you want to know the truth. But even then, let's say that the empire does fall. Are people all of a sudden going to stop caring about where their Bitcoin is coming from? Is everybody going to be a libertarian? Because there are going to be groups out there, and data intelligence, I think, is probably going to get cheaper, and there's going to be services that are going to be made accessible to everybody to track where their Bitcoin is coming from or where crypto is coming from. And they're not going to want to have crypto coming into their wallet from people that they don't like, or maybe from criminals, right? Because maybe they're judged by outside parties, and then outside parties stop doing business with them because they have certain convictions and beliefs which are at a contrast with the people who sent them the money. And so the fungibility problem is not going to be going away. It's always going to be a problem, whether you have big government or not. But anyways, I've ranted on that for too long. Okay, so this is from Ian Nicolescu. He says, how it's started versus how it's going. Will Ricketts, he says, Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin Magazine. American rapper Kanye West is reporting being kicked out of JP Morgan Chase, and his accounts will be closed. It's time for Bitcoin, Kanye. And then Will Ricketts, same guy, he says, Prime Trust has seemingly flagged a donation I made to a totally benign open source software project that's suspicious, and now my Strike and Swan Bitcoin accounts are frozen. Well done. Well done. Again, same thing with the Bitcoin, Canadian Freedom Coin Freedom Convoy protests, as we talked about earlier. He says, I've been waiting to hear from Strike support over a week and just opened a ticket with Swan. Okay, so that's the inefficiency you're going to have to deal with. And we talked about this bro in the last video who has to file OFAC reports because he received dusted Ethereum from Tornado Cash. So, again, even if you can overcome these issues, maybe you can work with the regulators, that's inherent inefficiency, which makes this monetary system less optimal than it should be. Okay? You just use Monero and make it a lot easier, okay? But again, people just want to overcomplicate things. I don't understand why. So, this is a bro who's been big on Bitcoin. He used to have Bitcoin, I think, in his bio here, but he took it out. He says sound money now. And Doug has had him onto the show to tell him about Monero. But he's having a wake-up call too. He says your mixed Bitcoin, UTXOs will be censored by large corporate mining firms in the future. You'll have to incentivize rogue miners with a higher fee to get them into a block. Even then, it's not guaranteed for slower confirmation times. This is 100% coming. So, yeah, he's starting to see the writing on the wall here. And you're going to see more centralization. And this is, again, from another Bitcoin bro. I mean, it's interesting how much of the negative Bitcoin news I get from Bitcoin bros who, despite all the negative news, stay hyper bullish on Bitcoin, and still think its adoption is going to be somehow, like, by default good for the world, right? But this is from Dennis Porter. He says the deal with the devil has officially arrived, and he's linking to an article. I believe this is by the CoinDesk. He didn't really cite, but this is from David Atley. He says Binance launches $500 million lending project to support crypto miners. Right, so the big exchanges, the big banks, they're going to have the financial capacity to give loans to, or the big Bitcoin firms, let's just say, are going to have the collateral with their Bitcoin machines and the other assets they have to get loans that the smaller guys aren't going to be able to get. Okay, but big exchanges are also going to be incentivized to lend to the big blue chip Bitcoin miners who are corporates because they're then going to be a creditor. And if they're a creditor, they're the first people to get paid back in the event of a bankruptcy. And because of all the extra regulations that these big corporations have to abide by, they can be that much more sure that they are going to get their money back rather than just loaning it to some dude off Patreon who wants to start his own little Bitcoin mining project, right? So more centralization incentives playing into that. And let's get to some interesting news about the increase in KYC. We've been watching MasterCard for a long time. MasterCard is pretty much at the forefront of the legacy financial system taking over crypto and making it into the new crypto world order. We've done videos on this. Go check out our MasterCard, the new crypto world order. And MasterCard is invested in the Digital Currency Group. Digital Currency Group invested in a lot of companies in regards to data intelligence, in regards to identity verification, exchanges, crypto regulation, and compliance, etc. So they're investing that way. They think that's where it's going, and perhaps they have the money to make that happen. I think they do, honestly, because most people take the path of least resistance. All they have to do is set up the incentive structures for everybody to take a path of least resistance, which just basically means them selling out their data to the big tech firms who can profit from that data for advertising, and then to law enforcement who will subsidize this stuff probably in order to make it so everyone complies with the tax code. So moving on, MasterCard's acquisitions. This is a quote from the article from Blockworks. It says, MasterCard will partner with Paxos to offer a new suite of products, including crypto trading. That's the headline. But if you look into the article, it gets pretty interesting. It says MasterCard's acquisitions last year of crypto intelligence company CipherTrace. CipherTrace, we've heard of CipherTrace before, right? Because they're the ones trying to crack Monero. And they've done so unsuccessfully. And customer identity verification company Ekata give it a unique edge. Okay, so they're doing crypto data intelligence gathering, MasterCard, and they're investing in customer identity verification. Right. MasterCard said earlier this month that it was using data from CipherTrace to launch Crypto Secure, a dashboard designed to track where cardholders are purchasing crypto products. Right. Exactly. So there's that. Blockworks. South Korea plans to offer a digital identity secured by blockchain to citizens. This is from Bloomberg. So digital ID is going to be playing into blockchain. And do you guys remember Algorand about a year ago when COVID was taking off and people were being locked in their homes because they hadn't got the stabby? They were working on COVID stabby. I guess I could say it now. They're working on COVID passport technologies integrated into blockchain. That's what Algorand was working on. And so digital ID with blockchain, that's something that's been in the works for a while. And that's going to continue to be in the works. They're continuing to develop that. And that's going to be taken to the next level, perhaps, with Twitter working on a quote-unquote wallet prototype that supports, quote, crypto deposit and withdraw. So Elon Musk has discussed this, and a lot of people trust Elon Musk. A lot of people are rooting for him. Again, Elon Musk can do good things. He can also do bad things. You got to be careful of people who are very powerful, who are very famous. They may have great intentions, okay? But with all that power and all that money, he's the richest man in the world, you can very easily fall prey to delusions and deceptions. And he could be leading people forward with good intentions, but he may be leading them into something which is not good for us, okay? With all this stuff with Neuralink, these electric cars, which I've read can lock people into the car and take them directly to a police station. Now he's talking about creating a social media website, okay, which is like the app to rule them all. He's calling it the X app, where you've got your social media profile, which has all your personal information about you, basically. It has your crypto integrated. It has your banking information integrated, and it's got other economic activities. So it could be like a Facebook marketplace. You've got your wallet on your profile, and then everything is tracked, totally tracked. Okay, and he may mean to do this with good intentions, but it could be that it turns out to be very Orwellian, right? Because what if Elon Musk steps down from Twitter at some point, some other people take over, they get bought off, and then it turns into a nightmare? It's very possible. So that's something to consider. That's something that's coming. And I think that's going to introduce significant privacy problems. Zero Hedge, the one doomer Zero Hedge article of the day. You got to have one. It says, Aussie bank begins linking customer transactions, to carbon footprint. Here we go. So this has been something long in the making, and it looks like we're finally arriving here. The green social credit score scheme accelerates. Say that 5 times fast. But yeah, I don't see how Bitcoin fixes this, as we've discussed in the past, because third-party custodianship, KYC, your transactions being tracked and traced. Maybe they can't stop you from transacting your Bitcoin, because you do have that level of sovereignty when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto, unless it's on an exchange, right? But they can do sin taxes. They can do other penalties on you if you go over your certain allotted carbon amount as per their calculations. And so it's just another instance in finance with Bitcoin and these other non-fungible currencies where you are guilty until proven innocent. And there's been many instances of this, and that all is being taken into account because it turns into risk modeling, right, with exchanges and everybody else who wants to comply with the law. They may not want to do business with you if you are violating certain regulations which make you a higher risk person, somebody who's more likely to be involved in quote-unquote criminal activity, which in this instance would be going over your carbon footprint. And a lot of these corporations are ESG, or they're going in that direction, and they're all part of the system, right? So that could play into that. There's going to be incentives to enforce this, even for people with surveillance ledgers like Bitcoin. So just want to point that out. Monero, obviously freaking key. So not only is Monero going to be key because they're going to do price controls and they're going to try to make it so that they can limit the amount of inflation happening, which the Fed, I think at some point, and other central banks are going to have to lower rates to zero in order to stop a deflationary shockwave where banks collapse and people can't pay debts, which leads to a margin call of dollars of sorts. And they're going to have to lower interest rates, which means inflation is going to just continue to take off. They haven't gotten a hold on inflation. And so they're going to have to do something else to make it look like they're trying to stop inflation, which means price controls. And that's going to lead to shortages. Obviously, the market price signals don't get sent to the producers of the goods because they can't make the profit that they need to make because they're suffering from inflation too. And so that's going to make it so that less of the good gets produced. Therefore, the politicians are going to try to solve that problem with rationing, and black market's going to boom because people are going to want to keep up their lifestyle having more than the rationed amount. Or if people really need money and they need to buy other things that they can't get, then they're going to sell what it is that they're rationed to people who can afford to buy it. Black market crops up. That's good for Monero, but also maybe the supply is there, but you can't have the supply because you've already been over your certain carbon allotted amount. You've already gone over your footprint. And so then you have to go into the black market for that reason. And so all this stuff is playing into the super hyper mega bullish case as to why I think black markets are going to significantly increase agorist, circular economies and such, the growth of the dark web, and the bullishness for Monero. Let's move on. This one kind of plays close to home for me. This is from Megan Basham. We are concerned that religious institutions, houses of worship, and people of all faiths are at risk of having their business, credit, or even personal or private bank accounts terminated for no reason at all. And this is from foxbusiness.com. Chase Bank allegedly shutters bank accounts of religious freedom nonprofit. And because increasingly politics is being integrated into every aspect of society, sports, religion, everything. And so you can't have the religious freedom anymore to say what are positions of your religion without it being construed by big institutions like banks to be a political statement, which means you are at risk of maybe losing your 501c3 because you're a church that advocates against abortion or advocates for conservative values, which are really just religious values at the end of the day. And so they shut down your bank and they make it harder for you to sustain. Maybe they make it so that you're taxed because they consider you to be a political advocacy entity rather than a religious one. So that's a consequence of everything becoming politicized, and that has also, I think, financial implications. Moving on. This is where we get to talking about the tax implications of everything going on in the world. Australia will keep its capital gains tax on crypto in place, which essentially means it's not going to be a currency. Because if you got to pay capital gains tax, or you got to report the sale of property essentially with every transaction you make, you can't turn that into a currency that you use regularly. Or you're just going to need your accountant to be busting his butt to keep track of all that stuff. Now, luckily, there are apps which do make it easier for you to track this stuff, but ultimately, you're going to have to keep your crypto on the exchange if you want to use this stuff as a currency, like regularly for a business. And the reason for that is if you take it off the exchange and you're shuffling it amongst different wallets, it becomes almost impossible to keep track of your basis. It becomes almost impossible for your software to keep up with that stuff, which means the tax implications become that much more difficult to ascertain, which has implications for your business. So that's going to play into the third-party custodianship as well, I think. But obviously, I don't advocate for people to keep their crypto on the exchange. I just think you should take it off the exchange. Don't mess with the exchange. And if you do use this stuff as a currency for your business, make sure you're keeping track of your basis. You have to do that so that you can properly report this stuff and stay out of trouble. So that's that. This is just something that's been happening. Increasingly, gold is flowing from west to east. There was something interesting that happened in regards to some of these big bullion dealers, where they had a big shortage of silver, and they were telling people they were going to pay $10 over spot for each ounce of bullion that they sent back to the exchange. So that indicates that there's a huge shortage of the metal out there. Now, we've talked about price manipulation for gold and silver for quite some time here. I think the spot price and the real physical metal premium is going to have a huge divergence. I actually think we're having a huge historical divergence right now, which is only going to get worse, okay? Because if you have the physical selling for significantly more than what is being advertised on the market, which is pretty much cornered and controlled by COMEX and the LBMA, well, that's going to create an arbitrage opportunity for anyone who wants to take advantage of that and can see that that price system is going to collapse. And who has an incentive in doing that? Well, the people who hold the most gold, which is China, India, Turkey, and Russia, who are all, for the most part, becoming rather anti-Western. And so if they want to increase their FX reserves and they want to increase their balance sheets, one way to do that is to subvert and undermine the price control mechanism and system, which is in control by the Western power financial structures. So that could be something which happens. But at first, it's going to be firstly, it's going to be important for them to sell their dollars and their dollar-denominated assets in treasuries. But unfortunately, they have a lot of dollar-denominated debt, so it's a little bit more of a complex situation than that. But that's something I'm looking out for. Currency wars. Are we winning? This is from Lidon. The Chinese are throwing their dollars back to the Americans, and the Americans are throwing them their gold. Now, I don't know how much gold we actually have in America. I mean, there hasn't been an audit of Fort Knox, I think, since 1952, I want to say. A long time ago. So, that's something going on. And then just a few comments here on CBDCs. Alex Gladstein, the BIS, and the Hong Kong authorities have completed a retail CBDC prototype. They call it Arum, Latin for gold, and praise its trustworthiness and privacy. So the CBDC is coming. That's what's going on. In reality, it'll be an inflation and surveillance machine. CBDCs are a gaslighting operation. So CBDCs are continuing to make the rollout. The new British Prime Minister is no friend of Bitcoin. The news, quote-unquote, accounts are misleading you for engagement. Yeah, of course he's not a friend of Bitcoin. Are you serious? The new Prime Minister of the UK is a former Goldman Sachs bro. He's part of the World Economic Forum. And we're not going to listen to this whole video, but basically he says, yeah, we're going to roll out the CBDC. It's going to be awesome. And I think we've been through articles before here on the channel that have talked about how for the UK, their CBDC is going to make it so that, get ready for this, you can transact with, well, so much anticipation. I forgot what I was going to say. You can transact with essential and non-essential entities. That's what I forgot to say. So, yeah, essential, non-essential entities, that whole paradigm is going to play back into this. And again, as we mentioned earlier, politics is playing a role in just about everything now, which means a non-essential entity probably going to be an entity that for the most part, is traditional, is conservative, and those that are essential, as we saw during the lockdowns, probably those selling drugs and probably those engaged in the further dismantling and destruction of the country. So that's that. More bullish Monero news. FDA declares Adderall shortage. Fears patients will turn to black market as some are forced to shop around 40 pharmacies to get the ADHD drug. Okay, so just another example of shortages leading to black market booms. And most people, they're going to see this and be like, oh, just people getting drugs in the black market. What's new? But that's not just going to be for ADHD drugs. That's going to be for a lot of other things too. Go check out our video I think we did a month or two ago, like the super up mega bullish case update or something. We have like a 20-minute long discussion about price controls and all the price control policies which are going, which are being implemented all around the world. It's a global phenomenon now. In Belarus, they just recently announced price controls. They are having problems with inflation. And the Belarusian strongman, Alexander Lukashenko, said he was prohibiting inflation. Prohibiting inflation, yeah. So we'll see how well that works out, but that's going to boom the black markets. So that's that. And yeah, I wanted to get to a bro down here. By the way, go follow me on Odysee. We're close to 1,000 subscribers, which I think is kind of cool. A lot of you guys like to follow me over there, which I think is great. But yeah, I want to respond to 564 Trader. He had a comment that I said I would respond to, and he said some interesting things that I think were worthy of a response. So he says, it's really fun to watch you waiting for your crypto chosen one. You are a religious person, so by your religious habits, not an argument, you will hope that the future holds Messiah. Yeah, but I don't see that in crypto. You will seek Messiah in every aspect of your life, but no. But what I want you to point attention to when I read this is that there are no questions. There's no sense of curiosity. There's no inquisitiveness that is looking for a sensible dialogue. It's just he's trying to impose upon me preconditioned beliefs that he has about me and about Monero. And I think he's trying to convince himself in this case, because the only reason you want to do that is because you want other people to believe what you believe. And maybe you're insecure about what you believe, and so you go through all the trouble to post this giant thing on here. And it doesn't really accomplish anything, but I'm going to respond to it, so maybe it did. If you don't criticize your Monero, then there's no progress. Yeah, I criticize Monero quite a lot. I say, well, relative to how bullish I am on it and how much good things I say about it, I do criticize Monero. I don't think it's necessarily going to lead to some kind of paradise here on Earth. I think a lot of Monero bros do believe that if we all adopt Monero, then there's going to be some paradisiacal outcome. But I think Monero is pretty good for a cryptocurrency. Absolutely. And by the way, Monero is criticized quite often by a lot of Monero bros in the community. There's something on Reddit just about every week looking for, flaws in our thesis. So there's that. It's more skeptical than I think any other crypto sphere. The betterment of monetary system is not holding dear to a chosen one, but by creating a better and better system. Okay, that's tautological. That's why today's fiat system is failing, because money became a religion. I don't disagree there. I think money did become a religion. I think people idolize money more than they should, and I think that's a problem that the libertarians fall into. They tend to believe that if we just have the free market, everything will be better, but that doesn't get to the root of the problem. One of the reasons why people have moved away from libertarianism is because there's no focus on the importance of culture and the importance of real community that comes together based on higher values. And freedom is one of those things where it doesn't necessarily exhibit, how do I say it? Freedom is too vague to exhibit a kind of sense of, well, let's go this direction, we're going to get freedom, and then it's just all going to be okay. Because I think most people know deep down it's more complicated than that. Okay, freedom starts on the individual level. And it's not necessarily something that is beholden to the realm of politics and politics only. The libertarians, they believe that if you get rid of politics, then you're going to, by default, have more freedom. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, because people are slaves to sin. That's where it starts, the enslavement and bondage to sin. If you are enslaved to sin, then you are enslaved to worldly things. You are enslaved to your lust. You're enslaved to women. You're enslaved to greed. You're enslaved to money. You're enslaved to gluttony. You're enslaved to food. And anyone who can get those things in the world can leverage those things over you and turn you into a slave. That's how slavery works. Slavery starts with the self, with the enslavement of yourself to your own passions. And if you're enslaved to your passions, somebody can dangle things in front of you which inflame your passions, which can then be used to control you. That's how that works. But the libertarians, they don't focus on that. There's sort of like this secular bent in libertarianism, which doesn't want to focus on religion. There's this no gods, no masters thing that happens. But the problem is, if you don't have anything that you humble yourself to that's higher than yourself, then you're not going to be able to establish a discipline which is in conjunction with disciplinary structures that other people have in their own lives, which creates a community that can live in peace in some relative sense of harmony. And I think that's the church. That's the importance of the church, and particularly the Orthodox Church, because there aren't schisms happening everywhere because everybody's interpreting the Bible differently and all this stuff. So, and also it's the true religion. So there's that. But yeah, money became a religion, and that definitely caused a lot of problems, for sure. People just believe the king, the dollar, government, not properly criticizing it. Okay. Not having enough money, they work harder, giving more taxes to mad government, which spends money on weapons, raining them on Ukraine and other countries. So that this is barely coherent, dude. You gotta. So then there is instability in the world, and people are wondering why fiat system is failing. At the same time, you dream to have Monero as a king. No, I don't. No, I don't idolize Monero. I mean, Monero could be adopted, and there could still be insane amounts of problems in the world. And I talked about this theme very much back when Monero Bros were donating Monero to the Ukrainian military effort. I thought that was the dumbest thing I'd ever seen, and I think that opened up a portal to a dimension of hell, where we could see a future where Monero is adopted, but with every local conflict, which can be interpreted and advertised and portrayed in millions of different ways, and can be manipulated by algorithms on these social media websites. You could have it so that you have people all over the world who can instantaneously and anonymously send quote-unquote digital energy to fuel the flame of any fire that is happening in the world. And that is a bad thing. And that gets rid of any possibility of national democratic politics, which to me isn't really much of a problem. I'm not a pro-democracy person. But that has implications, significant implications. And just because everyone adopts Monero doesn't mean that we're by default going to be in a good world. I don't believe that. I mean, it's good that we get central banks out of the way, and I think it's obvious that the people who run the current society and the governments thereof are satanic. I think that is very much the case. And I think it's good that we create systems outside of that system, because obviously it's an evil system. But I'm not saying that I dreamed that Monero as a king. I don't idolize Monero. I think Jesus Christ is the only way, and I think you could have no cryptocurrency, and I think that you could have no technology even, and have a better world where people are Orthodox Christians than where if you were to have a world that adopts Monero that doesn't have any faith at all. So that's my position. Not recognizing that it's not tied to debt. Well, I discussed that earlier. So it will ultimately fail to be stable. I don't think that's the case. But I understand what he's saying. I mean, if you have debt, that means you have a consistent inelastic demand for the currency, which means that there is increased circulation, and there's a prominence of it being transacted for. But that doesn't necessarily make sense. And that's not the only variable to consider, because we have a debt-based monetary system, are you saying that the money is going to stay stable? No, not necessarily. I mean, look at Japan. They have quite a lot of debt, and their currency has fallen from $100 or 100 yen per dollar to 150 just this year. So just because a currency is tied to debt doesn't mean it's going to be stable. Doesn't really make sense. Not necessarily the case. Thank God that I'm no longer a Christian. Oh, God bless you. I'm sorry. You need to come back to the church. I will pray for you. And that the Creator gave me so brilliant mind that I rejected stupidity of any religion. See, that plays into kind of what we talked about earlier. This person is very much possessed by his own pride, which is why he didn't ask any questions. There is no humility in this statement. There's no sense of inquiry as to why I believe what I believe or what I believe. He's just giving me a dictate. He's just giving me a lecture on what he believes to be true. And because he has so much pride and he thinks he's so brilliant, he doesn't have humility, which means he is subject to self-delusion. And that's what we just saw here. So be careful, guys, of people who don't express genuine curiosity about what you believe, because that's important for the establishment of any good relation. He goes into all this stuff down here. So that's what I've got to say on that. And I want to get to a couple emails, if I've got them, from listeners. Carl, I think I read a little bit about your email and your shtick, which I think was fantastic. Keep going, brother. Even if it doesn't take off at first, anything that any of you guys do has ripple effects throughout eternity. Even if it doesn't seem like anyone's paying attention, even if it doesn't seem like anyone is listening, you saying what you believe to be the truth and getting it out to people, it has an effect. You just have to do that and let God take the reins from there. I got some emails from this guy. Shoot. Where are you, dude? Curve Bro. What's up, Curve Bro? You were talking about how hate speech is definitely taking off in Germany. And he says, recent news is that imprisonment for expressing your opinion in a way that could be deemed as a hate crime will result in at least 6 weeks in prison on the Philippines, which had bent the knee to the German overlords. And he's talking about someone by the name of Oliver Janich, detention pending deportation in the Philippines in 6 weeks for an ironic joke on Telegram. So, yeah, I mean, Germany, I guess, is becoming rather authoritarian. And then he says, start relays for the onion networks. Buy a cheap VPS and set it up. Be the middle and guard so that you only handle encrypted traffic. And so you only support the network, but no government would likely have interest in you. P.S. Pay with Monero. Monero nodes use the Tor network as a backup plan in case the routes are blown away or censored so they can sync at least with whoever is online over Tor and produce the meme pool, etc. Set for privacy guide. Please link in the video description. Okay, so I'll see if I can link this in the video description. I'll see if I can remember. I guess Set for Privacy has guides on setting up a Monero node if you guys are interested in doing that. He says, bro, you are talking about getting Linux. Yes, I am talking about getting Linux. I have a buddy who's going to help me out with that. I know it hasn't happened. That just goes to show you how freaking busy I've been. But I'm moving closer to the church, and my buddy I meet with, he goes to the church. So I'll bring him back one of these days. We'll get it set up. And he sent me some Monero, which is great. He said, by the way, the Monero that I sent are the crap I mined with my retarded hardware, but I encourage everyone out there to do the same and join the pools. And check out the P2P pool, the peer-to-peer pool. We need to grow that up. I think that's really key. Set up nodes and the relays and spread the word on free trade in the spirit of Jesus Christ. God bless you. And then you asked me a theological question. And I told you that I was not able to discuss theology with people online. And that's not just me saying that. I talked to Metropolitan Jonah about this with a buddy of mine about a year or two ago. And this is back when I was first starting the channel. And I had done some like Law of God readings. And after I had spoken with Metropolitan Jonah, and he said to not get into theology, much less discuss it for at least 5 to 6 years after you have been into the church, I stopped doing that. And I'm trying to be obedient to his wisdom. He says to not get into theology or discuss with people online. He asked me, what do I think of the concept of heaven and hell? And what I said was this, and for those of you who want to discuss theology with me, this is going to be my response to you. I said, I don't have any personal opinions on heaven or hell. I believe the standard Orthodox position on heaven and hell. There's a lot of theology which you can find on those subjects. I'm personally not qualified to speak on these matters. I would consult an Orthodox priest, or I would check out somebody like Caban or J. Dyer. They know quite a lot regarding theology. Appreciate the insights, Curb Bro. God bless. And he responded to this, and he was a little bit upset, and I don't think he understood this position. Maybe because he doesn't understand Orthodoxy, but we're not in a Protestant church, so we can't like interpret things how we want to and have that be okay. It's the Orthodox Church has the dogma that you are to believe and humble yourself into believing, even if it sounds over your head. And there are some things which are like, whoa, this is quite out there. You humble yourself to the interpretation of Scripture of the Church Fathers. And that's all that I said to this gentleman. I said, I don't have a blessing to discuss this stuff. And the Orthodox position is the same for pretty much every Orthodox Christian. Now, I think there's some variability for evolution. There are some Orthodox Christians who believe evolution. Most don't. But in regards to things like heaven and hell, yeah, there are established doctrines on that. And if you want to understand my position, you go understand the Orthodox position, because I humble myself to the Orthodox position. And I try not to add any interpretations or opinions to that, because who am I to do such a thing? So that's all for that. Monero Matteo, a good little hour-long video for y'all today. We really whipped through it, didn't we? So thank you guys for the donations. I think I'll be back maybe a month or two from now. I've got to do continuing education for my accounting license. I've got to get this business started up, and I've got to look into everything involved with that. I am working with somebody who is consulting me on this, which is good. And same thing with the guitar lessons business and the move, and I'm just very busy. So I'll try to be back here as soon as I can, because this stuff is very important, and I find it fun to talk about, ultimately. But I do appreciate it. I do appreciate you guys continuing to support the channel and coming around to check us out. So that's it, Monero Matteo. Hope that you guys like the content, and you guys enjoy your lovely fall. And if I don't see you before Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the time with your family. So Monero Matteo, over and out. God bless.